Professor Zixnax adjusted his tentacles nervously as he peered through the observation window. The Galactic University's most notorious student was about to begin her practical exam, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly, hilariously wrong. "I still can't believe we allowed a human to enroll," he muttered to his colleague, Professor Blorp, a Deathworlder. "In our prestigious xeno-sociology program." Blorp's eye stalks swiveled in agreement. "Indeed. But you must admit Jennifer has shown remarkable aptitude." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Even if her methods are somewhat unconventional." Zixnax snorted, a sound reminiscent of a deflating balloon. "Unconventional? That's putting it mildly. Remember the cultural exchange incident?" Both professors shuddered at the memory. Who knew that extreme sports could be so extreme? Their reminiscing was cut short as Jennifer strode confidently into the exam chamber. The human female looked comically out of place among the delicate, crystalline architecture of the university. Her sturdy frame and predatory gait sent ripples of unease through the gathered alien students. "All right, class," Jennifer's voice boomed, causing several gelatinous beings to quiver. "Today's lesson is all about teamwork and trust-building exercises." A chorus of anxious chirps and worried bubbling filled the air. The last time Jennifer had organized a trust fall, 3 students had to be hospitalized. Who knew that a Flubonian's natural buoyancy would cause such mayhem? "Now, I know some of you are still a bit nervous after our last session," Jennifer continued, her grin widening. "But I promise, this time will be different. I've brought some special helpers." With a flourish, she pulled back a tarp, revealing a large terrarium. Inside, dozens of small, furry creatures scurried about. Zixnax's tentacles went limp with shock. "Are those Earth rodents?" he whispered. Blorp's eye stalks extended to their full length in alarm. "Worse, those are hamsters." The alien students recoiled in horror. Even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, Earth's fauna had a fearsome reputation. Hamsters with their beady eyes and razor-sharp incisors were particularly notorious. Jennifer, oblivious to the panic she was causing, continued cheerfully. "These little guys are going to help us learn about cooperation and problem-solving. Now, who wants to go first?" A brave Serlaxian raised a tentacle. "Excuse me, Professor," Jennifer burbled politely, "but aren't those creatures highly dangerous? I've heard stories of their voracious appetites and unstoppable breeding rates." Jennifer threw back her head and laughed, a sound that sent shivers down the spines or equivalent physical structures of everyone in the room. "Oh, you joker. These little furballs, they're practically harmless." She reached into the terrarium and scooped up a hamster, cradling it in her hands. The assembled aliens watched in horrified fascination as she nuzzled the creature against her cheek. "See, cute as a button," Jennifer cooed. The hamster, for its part, seemed equally perplexed by the situation. It blinked its beady eyes, whiskers twitching as it sniffed the air curiously. "Now," Jennifer continued, setting the hamster back in its enclosure, "we're going to divide into teams. Each team will be responsible for guiding their hamster through a maze. The catch? You'll have to work together to move obstacles and create paths. Communication is key." She began setting up a complex maze on the floor, complete with tiny ramps, tunnels, and what appeared to be a miniature ball pit. In the observation room, Professor Zixnax turned to Blorp, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. "She's using live Earth fauna in a student exercise. This has to violate at least 17 safety protocols." Blorp's gelatinous form rippled with anxiety. 19, actually. I've been keeping count." Back in the exam chamber, Jennifer was dividing the students into groups. "All right, Team Alpha, you're up first. Remember, gentle movements. We don't want to startle our little friends." A group of trembling aliens huddled around the maze entrance. Their assigned hamster sat in a clear plastic ball, whiskers twitching expectantly. "On your marks, get set. Go," Jennifer shouted, startling several of the more high-strung students. What followed was a comedy of errors that would have had any human rolling on the floor with laughter. The alien students, more accustomed to dealing with abstract concepts and theoretical models, found themselves woefully unprepared for the chaos of a living, breathing Earth creature. The Serlaxian attempted to use its natural telepathic abilities to communicate with the hamster, only to recoil in shock. It's just thinking about seeds and running," it exclaimed in disbelief. A Voltroxian student, whose species communicated through bioluminescence, frantically flashed patterns at the hamster. The creature naturally paid no attention and continued to roll its ball directly into a wall. No, you need to guide it," Jennifer called out, her voice a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Use your appendages to move the obstacles." Hesitantly, a Glupian extended a pseudopod towards the maze. It delicately nudged a small barrier, creating a new path for the hamster. For a moment, it seemed like progress was being made. The hamster rolled forward, navigating the newly created passage. Then, disaster struck. The hamster, apparently bored with its plastic prison, decided to take matters into its own tiny paws. With a determined squeak, it pushed against the ball's lid. "Oh no," Professor Zixnax whispered, his tentacles curling in horror. "It's escaping." The lid popped open, and chaos erupted. Alien students scattered in all directions, their carefully practiced composure abandoning them in the face of a free-roaming Earth predator. Shrieks, squawks, and assorted alien vocalizations filled the air. Jennifer, for her part, seemed delighted by this turn of events. "Excellent," she shouted over the pandemonium. "Now we can practice our animal handling skills." She dove after the escaped hamster, her movements quick and precise. The alien students watched in a mixture of terror and awe as she expertly corralled the tiny fugitive. "See, nothing to worry about," Jennifer announced triumphantly, holding up the squirming hamster. "Now, who wants to try next?" The room fell silent, save for the soft sound of a glupian quietly oozing towards the exit. In the observation room, Professor Blorp turned to Zixnax, his eye stalks drooping in resignation. "I believe we may need to reconsider our curriculum," he said softly. Zixnax could only nod in agreement, his tentacles wrapped protectively around his torso. Perhaps we've been too hasty in our judgment of Deathworlders," he mused. "Their methods may be unorthodox, but you can't deny the results." They watched as Jennifer, still grinning from ear to ear, began to set up for the next round. The alien students, despite their initial terror, were starting to show signs of curiosity. A brave Zerlaxian was even cautiously extending a tentacle towards one of the hamsters, its fear giving way to fascination. "You know," Blorp said thoughtfully, "I'm beginning to see why the humans have managed to spread so far across the galaxy. They have a unique ability to—" "What's the phrase Jennifer uses? Roll with the punches." Zixnax chuckled, a sound like rustling leaves. "Indeed. Though I shudder to think what kind of punches could possibly exist on a death world to prepare them for this level of chaos." As they continued to observe, the scene in the exam chamber gradually transformed. The alien students, inspired by Jennifer's fearless example, began to approach the exercise with more enthusiasm. They started to work together, combining their unique abilities to guide the hamsters through the maze. A Voltroxian used its bioluminescence to create enticing light patterns, luring a hamster towards the correct path. A Zerlaxian gently lifted obstacles with its telekinetic abilities, while a Glupian formed itself into living bridges and ramps. Jennifer moved among them, offering encouragement and advice. Her laughter, once terrifying to the alien students, now seemed to infect them with a sense of joy and excitement. "You're doing great," she called out to a group that had successfully guided their hamster through a particularly tricky section. "See, teamwork makes the dream work." The alien students exchanged confused glances at the unfamiliar idiom, but the sentiment was clear. They were accomplishing something together, overcoming their fears and preconceptions. As the exercise continued, Professor Zixnax found himself leaning closer to the observation window, his earlier trepidation replaced by genuine interest. "Remarkable," he murmured. "She's managed to turn a potential disaster into a genuine learning experience." Blorp's eye stalks bobbed in agreement. "It's not just about the hamsters," he observed. "Look at how the students are interacting. Species that would normally avoid each other are working side by side." Indeed, the exam chamber had become a whirlwind of interspecies cooperation. A Zerlaxian and a Voltroxian, whose species had a long history of mistrust, were huddled together, strategizing on how to coax a particularly stubborn hamster through a tunnel. A group of Glupians had formed a living conveyor belt, passing hamster balls from one end of the maze to the other with surprising efficiency. Jennifer stood in the middle of it all, her face beaming with pride. "That's it," she encouraged. "Use your unique abilities. There's no one right way to solve this puzzle." As the professors watched, they began to see the method behind Jennifer's apparent madness. By introducing an element of controlled chaos, she had forced the students out of their comfort zones. In facing a common challenge, however small and furry, they were learning to appreciate each other's strengths and overcome their differences. "You know," Zixnax said slowly, "I'm beginning to think we may have underestimated our human student." Blorp's form rippled in agreement. "Indeed, her methods may be unconventional, but the results speak for themselves. Look at how engaged the students are." It was true. The alien students who had started the exercise in terror were now fully immersed in the task. They cheered each other on, celebrated small victories, and even began to show affection towards the hamsters. A Zerlaxian, its tentacles quivering with excitement, successfully guided its hamster through the final section of the maze. "We did it," it exclaimed, its normally monotone voice tinged with emotion. "The little earth beast and I, we understood each other." Jennifer rushed over, beaming with pride. "Fantastic job," she exclaimed, offering a high five. The Zerlaxian, confused but caught up in the moment, awkwardly slapped its tentacle against Jennifer's hand. The room erupted in cheers and various alien approximations of applause. Even the hamsters seemed to pick up on the excitement, running in gleeful circles in their balls. As the celebration continued, Professor Zixnax turned to Blorp, his tentacles twisting thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "perhaps we've been too rigid in our teaching methods. This controlled chaos seems to have brought out the best in our students." Blorp's eye stalks swiveled in agreement. "It certainly produced results we never anticipated. Who would have thought that Earth rodents could be such effective teaching tools?" They watched as Jennifer began to wrap up the exercise, helping the students return the hamsters to their enclosure. The alien students, once terrified of the tiny creatures, now handled them with careful affection. "All right, everyone," Jennifer called out, her voice carrying easily over the excited chatter. "Great job today. I hope you've all learned something about teamwork, adaptability, and maybe even conquered some fears along the way." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "But the most important lesson here isn't about hamsters or mazes. It's about challenging your preconceptions. Each of you came into this room with certain ideas about what you could or couldn't do, about what was dangerous or safe. And each of you proved those ideas wrong." The alien students listened intently, their various sensory organs focused on Jennifer. "Out there in the galaxy," she continued, gesturing broadly, "you're going to encounter all sorts of beings and situations that might seem scary or incomprehensible at first. But remember this day. Remember how you overcame your fear, how you worked together, how you found strength in your differences." A ripple of understanding passed through the room. The alien students looked at each other with new appreciation, seeing beyond the superficial differences of species and form. That, Jennifer said with a smile, is what xeno-sociology is all about. Understanding, adaptation, and cooperation. And if you can do it with hamsters, you can do it with anyone. The room erupted in cheers, whistles, and various alien vocalizations of approval. Even the hamsters joined in, their tiny squeaks adding to the celebratory cacophony. In the observation room, Professor Zixnax turned to Blorp, his tentacles waving with excitement. "I think," he said slowly, "we may need to reconsider our entire curriculum." Blorp's eye stalks bobbed enthusiastically. "Indeed. And perhaps we should consider offering Jennifer a teaching position after she graduates." Zixnax's tentacles curled in amusement. "Can you imagine? A human professor at the Galactic University." They both chuckled at the thought, but there was a note of seriousness underlying their mirth. They had just witnessed something remarkable, a breakthrough in interspecies understanding, catalyzed by a human and a handful of hamsters. As they watched Jennifer and her students file out of the exam chamber, still chattering excitedly about their experience, both professors knew that this day would mark a turning point, not just for their university, but potentially for galactic society as a whole. After all, if a Deathworlder could teach a group of diverse alien species to work together, using nothing more than a few Earth rodents and a homemade maze, what other seemingly impossible feats might humans be capable of? The possibilities, they realized, were as vast and exciting as the universe itself. Epilogue. Word of Jennifer's unconventional teaching methods spread quickly through the Galactic University. At first, there was skepticism and even outrage from some of the more traditional faculty members, but as reports of improved interspecies cooperation and heightened student engagement began to pour in, attitudes started to shift. Jennifer, for her part, took her newfound fame in stride. She continued to push boundaries and challenge preconceptions, always with that characteristic human blend of determination and humor. Her Hamster Harmony exercise, as it came to be known, became a staple of the xeno-sociology curriculum. Students from across the galaxy would sign up for the course, eager to experience the infamous Deathworlder teaching methods for themselves. And while there were certainly mishaps along the way, the great hamster escape of 2285 would go down in university legend. The overall impact was undeniable. Graduation rates soared, and Galactic University alumni became known throughout the cosmos for their exceptional adaptability and teamwork skills. As for Professors Zixnax and Blorp, they found themselves at the forefront of a pedagogical revolution. Their paper-controlled chaos, Deathworlder methodologies, and xeno-sociological education became required reading and teaching programs across the galaxy. Years later, when asked about the experience, Professor Zix would often chuckle, his tentacles waving nostalgically. "You know," he'd say, "I never thought I'd say this, but those Earth hamsters taught us as much as we taught our students. They showed us that sometimes the best way to learn is to embrace the unexpected, to find harmony in chaos." And so, in universities and learning centers across the galaxy, hamster wheels began to appear alongside quantum computers and holographic star maps. A small reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons can come from the most unlikely sources. After all, in a universe full of wonders, why shouldn't a tiny Earth rodent be the key to unlocking greater understanding between species? As the years passed, Jennifer's influence spread far beyond the halls of the Galactic University. Her innovative teaching methods, once considered outrageous, became the gold standard for interspecies education across the cosmos. Governments and diplomatic corps began to take notice. If a human and a handful of hamsters could bridge the gap between such diverse species in a classroom setting, what might be possible on a galactic scale? Jennifer found herself increasingly in demand as a consultant for interstellar peace talks and trade negotiations. Her unique ability to find common ground in the most unlikely places proved invaluable in resolving conflicts that had persisted for centuries. One particularly memorable incident occurred during tense negotiations between the silicon-based crystallines of Zeta Reticuli, the gaseous nebulons of the Orion Spur. The two species, so fundamentally different in their physiology and culture, had been locked in a bitter territorial dispute for generations. Traditional diplomatic approaches had failed time and time again. Enter Jennifer, armed with nothing but her wit, her experience, and a crate full of hamster balls. The assembled dignitaries were skeptical, to say the least. The crystalline ambassador, her fractal form shimmering with barely contained disdain, voiced what many were thinking. Professor Jennifer, with all due respect, how can these primitive Earth creatures possibly help resolve our complex geopolitical issues? Jennifer just smiled, that familiar twinkle in her eye. Well, Your crystalline majesty, she said, her voice carrying that unique blend of respect and irreverence that had become her trademark. I find that sometimes the best way to tackle big problems is to start small, really small, like hamster-size small. Before anyone could object, she released the hamsters into a specially designed zero-gravity playpen in the center of the negotiation chamber. The tiny creatures, specially trained for low-gravity environments, began to float and tumble through the air in their clear plastic balls. Now, Jennifer announced, her voice cutting through the shocked silence, your task is simple. Work together to guide these hamsters through this three-dimensional maze. She gestured to a complex structure of tubes and platforms floating in the center of the room. The catch: each species can only interact with certain parts of the maze. You'll have to cooperate to succeed. What followed was a scene that would have been comical if the stakes hadn't been so high. Crystalline diplomats, their usual grace and poise abandoned, found themselves contorting into bizarre shapes to redirect floating hamster balls. Nebulan representatives puffed and swirled, creating gentle currents to guide the rodents through gaseous portions of the maze. At first, there was chaos. Hamsters bounced off crystal formations, swirled through nebulous clouds, and generally caused adorable havoc. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. The crystallines, used to rigid, unchanging structures, began to appreciate the nebulans' ability to adapt and flow. The nebulans, in turn, found themselves admiring the crystallines' precision and stability. As the hours passed, laughter or the various species equivalents began to fill the chamber. Crystalline and nebulan diplomats who had been hurling insults at each other just days before were now cheering each other on, offering suggestions, and even engaging in playful banter. By the time the last hamster had been successfully guided through the maze, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. The tension that had dominated the proceedings for weeks had dissipated, replaced by a sense of shared accomplishment and newfound understanding. As Jennifer began to pack up her hamsters, the crystalline ambassador approached her, multifaceted form glittering with what could only be described as emotion. "Professor," she said, her crystalline voice tinged with awe, "I believe we owe you a debt of gratitude. You've accomplished in one day what our finest diplomats couldn't achieve in centuries." The nebulan representative, a swirling cloud of iridescent gas, pulsed in agreement. Indeed, it thrummed. "We came here seeing only our differences, but these tiny creatures have shown us the value of our diversity. Perhaps there is more that unites us than divides us." Jennifer smiled, cradling a sleepy hamster in her hands. "That's the beauty of it," she said softly. "Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to see the bigger picture. These little guys don't care about territorial disputes or ancient grudges. They just see beings who can help them reach their goal. Maybe we could all learn something from that simplicity." The peace accord that was signed that day would go down in galactic history, not just for the long-standing conflict it resolved, but for the unprecedented level of cooperation and mutual understanding it fostered between the two species. As news of the Hamster Diplomacy miracle spread across the galaxy, Jennifer found her inbox flooded with requests. From warring factions to corporations struggling with interspecies mergers, everyone wanted to experience the hamster effect for themselves. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with these developments. There were those who felt that Jennifer's methods were undignified, that they somehow cheapened the gravitas of galactic diplomacy. Critics pointed out that not every problem could be solved with adorable Earth fauna and team-building exercises. They argued that by oversimplifying complex issues, Jennifer was doing more harm than good. But for every critic, there were dozens of supporters who had seen the results firsthand. Species that had been at each other's throats for millennia were now engaging in cultural exchanges. Trade routes that had been closed due to long-standing animosities were reopening. The galaxy, it seemed, was becoming a more interconnected and harmonious place. Jennifer, for her part, took both the praise and the criticism in stride. "Look," she'd often say in interviews, her eyes twinkling with that characteristic mix of humor and determination, "I'm not saying that hamsters are the answer to every problem in the universe, but what they represent, curiosity, adaptability, the ability to find joy in simple things, those are qualities that every sentient being can learn from." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "In the end, it's not about the hamsters. It's about reminding ourselves that no matter how different we may seem on the surface, we all share some fundamental experiences. We all know what it's like to face challenges, to need help, to celebrate success. If a hamster can bridge the gap between a crystalline being and a sentient gas cloud, imagine what we could achieve if we approached each other with that same openness and lack of preconceptions." As the years passed, Jennifer's influence continued to grow. The hamster diplomacy model was adapted and refined, incorporating various Earth species and even creatures from other worlds. There were the kitten negotiations that ended a centuries-long blood feud between warring insectoid hives, and the puppy peace talks that successfully mediated a complex trade dispute in the Andromeda galaxy. But perhaps the most profound impact of Jennifer's work was the gradual shift in how species across the galaxy viewed each other. The idea of a Deathworlder began to lose its fearsome connotations. Instead, humans and other species from high-gravity, high-danger planets came to be seen as valuable allies, capable of thinking outside the box and thriving in challenging conditions. Universities across the galaxy began to actively recruit students and faculty from a wider range of backgrounds. The Galactic Council, once dominated by species from safe worlds, saw an influx of representatives from planets once considered too dangerous or primitive to participate in galactic politics. As Jennifer approached the twilight of her career, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her and the galaxy to this point. From a fresh-faced student who had caused panic with a handful of hamsters to a respected diplomat who had reshaped interstellar relations, it had been quite a ride. On the day of her retirement ceremony, the Grand Hall of the Galactic University was packed with beings from across the cosmos. Crystalline formations sparkled next to undulating masses of sentient gas. Insectoid hives buzzed in harmony with the subsonic rumbles of silicon-based giants. And there, scattered throughout the crowd, were dozens of her former students, each one a testament to the power of understanding and cooperation. As Jennifer took the stage, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with the same mischievous light that had both terrified and inspired countless students over the years. "When I first came to this university," she began, her voice carrying easily through the hall, "I was told that as a Deathworlder, I would need to learn to suppress my natural instincts, to become more civilized." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. "But what I've learned, what we've all learned together, is that true civilization isn't about suppressing our nature. It's about embracing our differences, finding strength in our diversity, and never losing our sense of wonder at the universe around us." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the hall. "Look around you. See the incredible tapestry of life that we've woven together. A few decades ago, many of you wouldn't have been in the same room without a heavily armed security detail. Now we're celebrating together, learning from each other, growing together." Jennifer's voice softened, taking on a more reflective tone. "Back on Earth, there's an old saying, don't sweat the small stuff, but I think our little hamster friends have taught us all a valuable lesson. Sometimes it's the small stuff that matters most. Sometimes it's the tiny gestures of kindness, the small moments of understanding that can change the course of history." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn-out hamster toy, the very same one she had used in her first class all those years ago. "This little guy has seen a lot," she chuckled. "It's been chewed on by Zarblaxian acid-mouthed slugs, lost in the methane swamps of Epsilon Eridani, and even taken a quick dip in the plasma oceans of Betelgeuse. But it's still here, still smiling, still ready for the next adventure." Jennifer held the toy up high. "This is my challenge to all of you. Never lose that spirit of adventure. Never stop reaching out to those who seem different. And never, ever underestimate the power of a small, furry creature to change the universe." The hall erupted in applause, cheers, and various species-specific expressions of approval. As the sound washed over her, Jennifer felt a sense of completion. She had done what she set out to do, not just to teach, but to transform, to show the galaxy that sometimes the most profound wisdom can come from the most unlikely sources. As she left the stage, surrounded by well-wishers and former students, Jennifer couldn't help but smile. The future of the galaxy was in good hands: paws, tentacles, and pseudopods. And somewhere, in a cozy habitat in the university's xeno-biology department, a group of hamsters ran happily in their wheels, blissfully unaware of the cosmic change they had helped to bring about. The universe, vast and wondrous as it was, had been forever changed by the simple lessons taught by a human professor and her tiny, furry teaching assistants. And as stars burned and galaxies swirled, the legacy of the Hamster Diplomacy lived on, a testament to the enduring power of curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. In the end, it turned out that humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic community wasn't their technology, their resilience, or even their adaptability. It was their ability to find joy and meaning in the simplest things and to share that joy with others across the vast expanse of space. And so, as Jennifer stepped into retirement and a new generation of diplomats, teachers, and adventurers took up the mantle, the galaxy continued to evolve. Species that once feared each other now worked side by side. Planets that had been isolated for eons opened their borders, and everywhere, in classrooms and diplomatic chambers and starship lounges, you could find small habitats housing Earth hamsters, a reminder that sometimes the key to understanding the universe is to start with understanding each other. The story of Jennifer and her hamsters became legend, passed down through generations across countless worlds. And though the details might change in the telling, the heart of the story remained the same. In a vast and sometimes terrifying universe, a little bit of warmth, a touch of humor, and a willingness to reach out to others can work miracles. As for the hamsters, well, they just kept on running in their wheels, teaching the galaxy one tiny step at a time.